Okay, so I think we'll kick off now. Hi, everyone. Thanks again so much for attending our session, looking at how the American consumer has changed. So in terms of priorities, diversity, multiculturalism, and the relationship with brands. And we're gonna be diving into data from GWI USA, our newest data set and our newest data product here at Global Web Index. And it's the biggest standalone data set we've released since our core product, so it's all very exciting. But before we get started, just a few quick intros. So my name is Verna, and I'm a Strategic Insights Manager here at Global Web Index, and I'm based out of New York. And joining me today also from New York is my colleague Doug, our Trends Analyst.
Hi everyone, good to be here.
And just one other note before we start, we won't be taking any questions live today, but if you do have any questions about this content, please just send an email to trends@globalwebindex.com and we'll respond to everyone's questions as thoroughly and as promptly as we can. So the title of our session today is looking at what really motivates the new American consumer. So how we want to get at that big question today is by exploring how America has changed and how American culture and American people have changed really dramatically over the last few years. So on the agenda for today, we're going to first give you all a bit of context into why we need to look closer at how the American consumer is changing. So what's so important about this moment in our industry, particularly, that forces us to re-examine our audience? And after that, we'll look at a few of the key ways that American consumers and their motivations are changing. So firstly, through diversity and the lens of intersectionality, and then through the multicultural lens. And then we'll shift gears a bit into priorities. And we'll look at how the rise of activism is shaping consumer values before we dig into how brands can respond particularly. And finally, we're going to tie it together with some key insights that will wrap it up and hopefully inspire everyone to take some of these learnings and apply them in your kind of day-to-day marketing and communications practice.
Yeah, but before we dive into all the research, we just want to give you a quick brief overview of who we are here at GWI, just so that you have a sense of who we are, how we do our research and our methodology, and where the data is coming from. So for those of you who are unfamiliar with us, Global Web Index is a market research company, and we provide consumer insights to leading brands, marketing agencies, and media organizations around the world. As you can see here, we are the home of the largest ongoing study on digital consumers around the world. We have the largest panel of consumers globally at about 22 million across 46 markets. And altogether, this research is representative of around 2 billion internet users. And we make this data available through an intuitive subscription-based platform, which allows teams to dive in, cross-analyze their audiences, and better understand behaviors, attitudes, interests, and a whole lot more.
Yeah, so in addition to that, we've also started running a new syndicated research study that's dedicated entirely to the US, really in order to understand the nuances of the American consumer and the American market. And this is called GWI USA, and it's the study that we'll actually be showcasing through these insights today. And GWI USA is representative of approximately 240 million internet users in the US across all 50 states, and cut across 210 designated market areas. It's also completely representative of the US population in terms of demographic makeup. So age, gender, income, racial and ethnic groups as well are really accurately represented in the sample that we use for GWI USA. Unlike our core survey, it covers a broad range of topics, but it goes a step further in understanding issues that are really quite unique to the US market. So it covers a huge range of local brands, obviously across different sectors that are only available in the US, but it also zeroes into issues that are really important and topical right now, like gun violence, equal rights, and government interference that, as I said, have all become so relevant in our society today. And some of these really compelling and important relevant topics are what we're going to cover. So without further intros, let's get right into it now. Now, as we mentioned before, our first section is going to be about context. So what is it about this moment in time right now that means our industry needs to look closer at America, at cultures, at our culture, and at consumers? And the answer, I think, is going to surprise some people. So this, I think, is probably one of the most eye-opening stats from the whole GWI USA data set. It's that only 9% of American consumers say they feel represented in advertising. And I think this really becomes a direction to think about representation in the creative mix, especially because, you know, we have so much media and so much spend in where the media goes. But when you look at how certain groups rank even lower on the scale of perceived representation, it gives us a lot of direction with how we can improve the creative. So Asian Americans, baby boomers, and people who identify as politically conservative all feel less represented than the average American. You know, so this definitely shows us why it's important to re-examine some of our, you know, key motivators and the research that we use to do so. So the first way we want to do this is by looking at diversity, but kind of going one step beyond how we've typically done so. And that's why we've called this section Diversity 2.0. So it's not that diversity hasn't been a priority for the marketing and advertising industries, but I think that what's often happened is that we focus on diversity in maybe more of a one-dimensional way. We often fall into the trap of looking at Black consumers or Asian American consumers or Hispanic consumers just as one block of people. And I think that as marketers, that really limits us from being able to speak to our end customer in a meaningful way. And that's because there's really just so many different layers of identity that form the basis of who each of us really is. And that's where this notion of intersectionality really comes into play.
Yeah, so in academic contexts, intersectionality is a theory that basically suggests how different aspects of a person's identity, like race, class, sexual orientation, religion, can combine to create unique modes of discrimination and privilege. But in our world, the world of market research, this idea can really help us to understand not just how people are experiencing discrimination and privilege, but how they relate to some of the big ideas or concepts of marketing that's evolving today. So how does cause marketing or multicultural marketing or progressive marketing messaging relate to kind of what different genders or different racial groups are going through? And to make this kind of messaging effective, I think it's a really important lens to keep in mind. So applying this intersectional lens really challenges our assumptions and our understanding about a lot of things. For example, race and culture, our data shows that 12% of Hispanic Americans also identify as Black, and it also changes our assumptions about sexual identity and political identity. According to GWI USA data, more than half of LGBTQ Americans actually don't identify as politically liberal. And that last example, it really challenges our assumptions about physical ability and lifestyle. And I think that the fact that 1 out of 5 people with a long-term health condition are also caregivers for someone else really challenges the understanding of what it means to live with chronic health problems and perhaps with a disability in a modern world.
Yeah, that's very true. So we also wanted to share some other examples that really illustrate how we can look at our consumer audiences through the lens of intersectionality. And perceptions around bigger social issues, I think, are one key place where we see it. So for example, we can look at a statement like this: I think that traditional gender roles are outdated. When you look at how many women specifically in the US agree with this statement and you cut that by race, you can see that there are clear differences. So Black women are actually the least likely to say that they see traditional gender roles as being outdated. And what's really interesting, and you don't see it on this slide, however, is that young Black women are actually less likely than young Asian American men to say that they see traditional gender roles as being outdated. And something like this might be really counterintuitive, but when you look at how Black women answer when it comes to questions that probe about issues that really disproportionately affect the Black community, like gun violence, for example, you can see that they are the most concerned out of all racial groups and out of all women about that. So there's so many different layers of identity that make people see certain issues as more or less important for them based on their unique lived experience. It's not just race, it's not just gender, it's not just some of these other identity characteristics, but really it is the kind of intersection of them all.
Yeah, and the intersectional lens is also really useful in looking at how different consumer groups either trust or distrust large corporations and brands. And as we can see on a general level, there is a proportionate relationship between income and trust, where higher income people are more likely to trust brands and large corporations. However, when you look at the effects of both race and income combined, you see something that's quite different and quite interesting. For Asian Americans, for example, income essentially has no effect on corporate trust, where lower income Asian Americans and higher income Asian Americans are pretty much just as likely to distrust big brands. But when you look at Black Americans, you see pretty much the opposite effect. Distrust of corporations is really, really high among Black Americans generally. And what's especially telling is that even for middle income Black Americans, distrust is nearly the same as for lower income Black Americans. Together, this all has huge implications for how big brands speak to consumers across income levels. The level of credibility and trust you have across middle income Americans, for example, is just not going to be the same for different racial groups. It might be higher among middle income Asian Americans and is likely to be a lot lower among middle income Black Americans.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Okay, so in this next section, slightly related but different, we want to call out the importance of the multicultural lens when looking at what motivates American consumers. So just for a bit of context, projections by the US Census Bureau estimate that by 2050, the majority of the US population will actually be non-white. And the Hispanic population alone is going to make up about 28% of the total population by 2060. So as a country, we're moving into multiculturalism just by definition of our population's makeup anyway. So having this sort of lens in play right now is going to be really important to preparing for a really diverse future.
Yeah, so let's take a look, for example, at the changing family unit, because I think it's a really nice way to see the impact of different cultures and immigrant groups on the makeup of the US as a whole. Now, there's a lot of really compelling data from places like the Pew Research Institute, which show us how American families are changing. And actually, I find this really interesting to learn that the American household is growing for the first time in over 100 years. And the number of people living in multi-generational households is at record levels. So one of the big things influencing this multi-generational household growth is the growing diversity in the US population. And actually, GWI USA data validates this. Among American grandparents, the ones that are most likely to be living in the same household as their own adult children are multicultural. Almost a third of Hispanic grandparents report that they live with their children, followed by Black and Asian American grandparents. And this has a lot of implications in how we target family advertising, how we build products and market them for parents and grandparents who will all live in the same household.
Yeah, no, that's definitely true. And staying on the kind of generational angle, multiculturalism is really important to consider when looking at how generational views differ between different racial and ethnic groups as well. So this is another great example of intersectionality at play. We know that generally younger people have more progressive views about social issues than older people. And something like believing that traditional gender roles are outdated is a very easy way to see that, right? It's typically younger people who are more ready to say that they think that traditional gender roles are outdated. However, the enthusiasm that young people of different racial and ethnic groups have for breaking gender stereotypes actually varies quite a bit. So in this chart, you can see, for example, that there's a very steady linear relationship for Hispanic Americans. As we look at younger groups, they are more likely to disregard traditional gender roles, but the difference is quite gradual. It's not super dramatic. However, when you look at Asian Americans, the difference is actually really, really dramatic, especially when you compare Gen Zs to any other generation. So the youngest Asian Americans hold really strong progressive views, it looks like from our data, about social issues like this one. And it's in huge contrast to the more gradual change in values that we see among other people, typically and among other groups. So the intersection really between generation and culture is an important one to look at. So when it comes to actually marketing to multicultural groups, it's important to look at the difference between targeting people with messages about culture versus actual visibility in advertising. And within groups, what consumers want to see actually varies quite a bit, whether it's visibility or specific cultural references. So for Black Americans, for example, our data shows differences that exist by age. Older Black Americans, as you can see, say that they're more likely to want to see ads that reflect their culture, while younger Black Americans report that they're more concerned about visibility. They kind of would prefer to see celebrities and actors who look like them in ads, and influencers and creators that reflect them as people. So this is really an important distinction. And for brands who are looking to craft multicultural marketing strategies aimed at youth versus older generations, this kind of insight can really shape the approach that you want to take.
Yeah, so as we've seen a lot of really good context into how the American consumer is changing from both a diversity and a cultural perspective, I think it's time to get into how kind of our values are changing. And the focus of a lot of this is going to be on the rise of activism in the country. So data from GWI USA shows that among American consumers, people are starting to think of altruistic goals like helping their communities, helping their environment, making a difference as on par with some of the more personal pursuits like making money or staying fit. And as you can see, this trend in a lot of areas around the world. In the context of finance and investing, we're seeing the rise of ESG or environmental social governments, and just a ton of news today around how ethically conscious investing is occurring in the market. So there's definitely a big play here for companies to really reflect on how they can cater to the more socially and environmentally conscious consumer that is rife within the country.
Yeah, I know that's definitely true. Thank you for that, Doug. But as always, there's always going to be variation depending on all sorts of identity characteristics, and age is one of them that we can call out because the results actually are really quite interesting. And this slide, I think, has some maybe the most surprising data. It's actually the oldest consumers we profiled that see themselves as the most outspoken about the issues that they care about. And I think this data in particular maybe shows us how important it is to kind of shake up some of our assumptions that, activism is all about young people, all about Gen Z protesting and posting on social media and, hashtags and everything. So when it comes to a lot of our metrics actually in the GWI USA data set that measure the potential for activism or the concern for issues around social justice and environmental justice, the pattern often follows this U-shaped curve. So yes, a huge number of Gen Zs are really outspoken about the issues that they care about. But then what you kind of see is that activist mentalities dip for a couple of generations before they pick up again when people get older. And we do see this rise of this activist mentality among older generations.
Yeah, it's very interesting and right. So for certain issues, this definitely seems to be the case. Environmental being the big one. You can clearly see that both the youngest and the oldest Americans are the two groups kind of driving this passionate sentiment about the environment. And similarly, the worries for gun violence follow that U curve as well. So how do brands embrace these changes and engage with consumers who are more diverse, more multicultural, and more activist minded? Well, according to GWI USA data, consumers are now fully demanding that brands be socially responsible above all else. This is actually the #1 attribute that consumers now want to see from their favorite brands and companies. And it surpasses things like improving consumers' day-to-day lives and listening to feedback. So in today's changing world, there's really no way that brands can maintain a long-term relationship with their customers anymore if they ignore that call to be socially and environmentally responsible. And this is really important when we think about the buyers of the future. Even though we see older people holding really strong activist values, the way that these values are translated into the brand relationship and the purchase decisions aren't necessarily as prominent as with younger consumers. Millennials and especially Gen Zs feel the most strongly about wanting to have a real human connection with their favorite brands. And they're also the most likely to say that the brands they buy from have to reflect their own personal values. So as younger people gain more purchasing power, it's going to be important for brands to speak to their values and realize that it's not just a transaction anymore. It is a real relationship that needs to be genuine going forward.
Yeah, and nurtured for sure. And what could happen eventually is that if brands don't reflect consumers' values, people will just stop buying them. The marketplace is very, very competitive, and with disruptor brands and the way that all kinds of brands can just engage via social, this is kind of what is happening. And this is especially true for younger, more diverse audiences. And GWI USA data shows us that multicultural consumers especially are much less brand loyal than white consumers. So for a new brand coming into the mix that wants to appeal to diverse audiences and maybe use progressive ideas in their marketing or cause marketing, it will probably be easier to sway Black, Hispanic, and Asian American consumers, especially the younger ones, from the brands that they're used to buying.
Yeah, good point, Verna. So I think, thanks for sticking with us so far, everyone. In the last few minutes here, I think we're just gonna wrap up with some key insights. So take it away.
Yeah. So yeah, again, thank you everybody for sticking with us. So a lot to think about there. So we've tried to distill it into just 4 kind of main insights that, if you take nothing else away from this webinar, hopefully these will kind of be lasting in your minds. So #1, the media is there. We know that the industry dedicates a lot of time and money into putting out content. But what we've seen is that the creative approach has room to better reflect our audiences, right? A lot of people feel perhaps not entirely represented in the advocacy